The desert wind carried an unusual sound that morning, something that made Joseph Begay stop his horse mid-stride. He had been riding the ancient trails of his ancestors since dawn, checking on the sheep that grazed in the remote canyons of the Navajo Nation. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable, a human voice calling for help. Joseph dismounted and listened carefully. His grandfather had taught him to trust his instincts in the wilderness, and something felt terribly wrong. The voice seemed to come from the direction of Devil's Canyon, a place where even the bravest warriors rarely ventured alone. Local stories spoke of strange disappearances and unexplained events in that rocky maze of red stone and shadow. As he led his horse toward the sound, Joseph's mind raced with possibilities. Who would be out here so far from the nearest road? The closest town was over 50 miles away, and this area was known only to a few shepherds and the occasional archaeologist studying the ancient cliff dwellings. The voice came again, clearer now and filled with desperation. It was definitely a woman, and she sounded terrified. Joseph quickened his pace, following the sound deeper into the canyon. The walls rose higher around him, blocking out much of the morning sun and creating an eerie twilight even though it was barely past sunrise. His horse began to act nervous, snorting and pulling back on the reins. Animals often sensed danger before humans did, another lesson from his grandfather. Joseph tied the horse to a sturdy juniper tree and continued on foot, moving as quietly as his traditional moccasins allowed. The canyon narrowed ahead, forming a natural bottleneck where ancient waters had carved the rock into impossible shapes. As he rounded a bend, Joseph saw something that made his blood run cold. About 30 yards ahead, a large burlap sack was suspended from a wooden beam that had been wedged between the canyon walls. The sack was moving, writhing as if something alive was trapped inside. "Help me. Please, someone help me." The voice was coming from inside the sack. "I can't breathe. I'm dying in here." Joseph's warrior training kicked in immediately. He scanned the area for any signs of danger, looking for whoever had done this terrible thing. The canyon was silent except for the woman's desperate pleas. No footprints were visible in the hard-packed sand. But that didn't mean much. A skilled tracker could move without leaving obvious signs. Moving closer, Joseph could see that the sack was secured with multiple layers of rope, tied with knots he didn't recognize. The beam supporting it looked freshly cut, suggesting this had happened recently. But who would do such a thing, and why? In all his years patrolling these canyons, he had never encountered anything like this. The woman's voice grew weaker. "Please." "I can't breathe much longer." Joseph realized he had to act fast. Whatever trap this might be, he couldn't stand by and listen to someone die. He pulled out his knife and approached the suspended sack, every sense alert for danger. The canyon walls seemed to close in around him as he prepared to cut the ropes. But something nagged at him. In the old stories, his grandmother had warned about spirits that could mimic human voices, luring the unwary into danger. Was this real, or was he about to walk into something far worse than a simple rescue? The woman's pleas continued, growing more desperate by the minute. Joseph took a deep breath and made his decision. Real or not, he couldn't ignore a cry for help. He reached up toward the ropes, his knife gleaming in the dim canyon light. Whatever was in that sack was about to be revealed, and he had a growing feeling that his life would never be the same after this moment. The wind died completely, leaving an unnatural silence broken only by the woman's weakening voice and the thundering of Joseph's own heartbeat. Joseph's knife sliced through the first rope with surprising ease, but the sack remained suspended by several others. As he worked, he tried to calm the woman inside by talking to her. "I'm here to help you," he called out softly. "My name is Joseph." "Can you tell me your name?" The response came as a whisper. "Sarah."
"Sarah Mitchell."
"Thank God you found me. I thought I was going to die in here." "How did you end up in this sack, Sarah?" Joseph asked while cutting through another rope. He wanted to keep her talking, both to keep her conscious and to learn what had happened. I was camping alone near the highway." Sarah's voice was barely audible now. "Someone grabbed me from behind while I was sleeping. I never saw their face. When I woke up, I was in this thing." Joseph frowned as he cut through the third rope. Her story seemed straightforward enough, but something still felt off. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to harm a random camper? And how had they managed to set up this complex pulley system in such a remote location? As the fourth rope parted under his blade, the sack swung slightly, and Joseph heard something that made his blood freeze. From inside the sack came not just Sarah's voice, but another sound. A low, rhythmic scratching, as if claws were scraping against fabric. "Sarah, are you hurt? Are you bleeding?" he asked, hoping there was a simple explanation. "I think so," came the weak reply. "My arms. Something's wrong with my arms. They feel strange, like they don't belong to me anymore." Joseph cut through the fifth rope, and now only one remained. The sack hung lower now, close enough that he could see it more clearly. What he noticed made his skin crawl. The fabric wasn't just moving from Sarah's struggles. There were bulges and shapes that seemed wrong, as if whatever was inside had too many limbs or appendages. "Please hurry," Sarah pleaded. "I can feel something happening to me. Something terrible." Against his better judgment, Joseph sliced through the final rope. The sack dropped to the ground with a wet, heavy thud that was nothing like the sound a human body should make. For a moment, everything was still. Then the sack began to tear open from the inside. Joseph stepped back, his hand instinctively moving to the medicine pouch his grandmother had given him. What emerged from the torn burlap made him question everything he thought he knew about the world. First came a pale human hand, definitely a woman's hand with painted fingernails. But as more of the arm appeared, Joseph saw that the skin was covered in a pattern of scales that shifted color in the dim light. Then another arm emerged, and another. 4 arms in total, all human-looking but wrong in ways that hurt to observe. "Don't be afraid," came Sarah's voice. But now it seemed to echo strangely, as if coming from multiple throats. "I'm still Sarah. Something happened to me, but I'm still me." The thing that had been in the sack sat up slowly, and Joseph finally saw its face. It was indeed a woman's face, beautiful in a terrible way with Sarah's blue eyes and blonde hair. But her smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, and her neck was longer than any human neck should be. "The person who did this to me," she continued, her multiple arms moving independently as she struggled to stand. "They injected me with something, some kind of experimental serum. I felt my body changing while I was trapped in there." Joseph wanted to run, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground. Everything his grandfather had taught him about the spirit world came flooding back, but none of those old stories had prepared him for this. Sarah took a step toward him, her movements fluid, but unnatural. "I can still remember being human," she said, and there was genuine sadness in her voice. "I remember my life, my family, but I can also feel this new hunger inside me, growing stronger every moment." The scratching sound Joseph had heard earlier made sense now. Sarah's fingernails had grown into claws during her transformation, and she had been unconsciously scraping them against the inside of the sack. "Who did this to you?" Joseph managed to ask, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. Sarah's head tilted at an impossible angle as she considered the question. "A man in a white coat. He said I was perfect for his experiment. He said the old ways and the new ways could be combined to create something wonderful." Joseph's blood chilled as he realized what this meant. Someone was conducting twisted experiments on people, using them as test subjects for some unholy fusion of science and dark magic. And now he was face to face with the result. Sarah smiled again, her sharp teeth glinting in the canyon's dim light. "I'm so grateful you saved me, Joseph. Now I won't have to die alone in that sack, but I'm afraid I can't let you leave." Joseph's warrior instincts finally overcame his shock, and he sprang into action. As Sarah lunged toward him with inhuman speed, he rolled to the side and came up running. Behind him, he could hear her claws scraping against the rock where he had been standing just seconds before. "You can't escape me, Joseph," Sarah called after him, her voice now carrying an otherworldly echo that bounced off the canyon walls. "I can smell your fear, and it smells delicious." Joseph ran harder than he had ever run in his life, his breath coming in sharp gasps as he navigated the twisting canyon passages. He could hear Sarah following him, but her movement sounded wrong. Sometimes she seemed to be running on the ground. Other times it sounded like she was climbing along the canyon walls like some kind of giant spider. As he rounded a bend, Joseph nearly collided with his horse, which was rearing and whinnying in terror. The animal had broken free from the juniper tree and was clearly sensing the same wrongness that Joseph now understood all too well. "Easy, boy," Joseph whispered, grabbing the reins and trying to calm the frightened animal. But even as he spoke, he could hear Sarah getting closer. Her voice echoed from multiple directions now, as if she was somehow surrounding him. "I don't want to hurt you, Joseph," she called out sweetly. "I just need to understand what's happening to me." Maybe you can help me figure out how to control this hunger." Joseph knew he couldn't outrun her on foot, but his horse was too terrified to let him mount. Instead, he slapped the animal's rump and sent it galloping toward the canyon entrance. At least one of them might escape to warn others about what was happening here. He pressed himself against the canyon wall and tried to think. His grandmother's stories came back to him, tales of how the ancient warriors had dealt with creatures that were neither fully human nor fully spirit. The old ways required understanding the nature of what you were fighting. Sarah appeared at the mouth of the canyon passage, moving with that same fluid grace that made Joseph's skin crawl. In the better light, he could see more details of her transformation. Her forearms moved independently and her legs had elongated, giving her an insect-like appearance despite her human face. "There you are," she said, tilting her head in that unnatural way again. "I was worried you'd gotten lost." "What do you remember about the man who did this to you?" Joseph asked, buying time while he tried to formulate a plan. Sarah paused, and for a moment her expression became almost human again. "He had gray hair and kind eyes. That's what fooled me at first. He approached my campsite saying he was a doctor, that there had been an accident on the highway and he needed help. When I followed him, he injected me with something." "What did he say about the experiment?" "He talked about bridging worlds," Sarah replied, her multiple hands gesturing expressively. "He said science had advanced far enough to prove that the old Native American legends were based on real creatures, real transformations. He wanted to recreate them using modern methods." Joseph felt sick as he realized the implications. Someone was using sacred knowledge from his people's traditions to create monsters. The stories his grandmother had told him weren't just legends. They were warnings about real dangers that had existed in the past. "He mentioned others," Sarah continued, stepping closer. "Other test subjects. He said I was number 7 and that the previous ones hadn't been as successful as he'd hoped." "What happened to the others?" Sarah's expression darkened. "They died. The transformations were too extreme, too fast. But with me, he said he'd perfected the process. I was supposed to be his greatest achievement." Joseph backed away as Sarah approached, but he was running out of room. The canyon wall was directly behind him now, and Sarah was blocking his only escape route. "I can feel it getting stronger," Sarah said, her voice taking on that otherworldly echo again. "The hunger, the need to hunt. He told me it would happen, that eventually my human consciousness would fade and the creature consciousness would take over completely." "Fight it," Joseph urged. "You're still Sarah, you still have a choice." "Do I?" Sarah asked, and suddenly all 4 of her arms shot out, her claws embedding in the rock on either side of Joseph's head. "Because right now all I can think about is how good you would taste." Joseph closed his eyes and reached for the medicine pouch his grandmother had given him. Inside were herbs and small objects that had been blessed by generations of medicine men. If the old ways had any power at all, he would need them now. As his fingers closed around the pouch, he heard Sarah gasp. When he opened his eyes, she had stepped back, her face contorted with pain. "What is that thing?" she hissed, staring at the pouch in his hand. Joseph smiled grimly as he realized he might have found a weapon after all. "The old ways," he said simply. "The real ones, not the twisted version that man used on you." Sarah's forearms writhed as if the very sight of the medicine pouch was causing her physical pain. "It burns," she whispered. "Just looking at it burns." Joseph opened the pouch and pulled out a small bundle of sage and sweetgrass. Even unlit, the sacred herbs seemed to have an effect on the creature Sarah had become. She stumbled backward, her inhuman grace temporarily abandoned. "This doesn't have to end in violence, Sarah," Joseph said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "Maybe there's a way to reverse what was done to you." Sarah's reaction to the sacred herbs gave Joseph hope, but it also revealed something troubling. As she backed away from him, her human features began to shift and change. Her face elongated, her blue eyes turned completely black, and her blonde hair fell out in clumps, revealing a skull that was no longer entirely human in shape. "The herbs are fighting the transformation," Joseph realized aloud, "but it's making you unstable." Sarah collapsed to her knees, all 4 arms clutching at her head as if trying to hold her skull together. "It hurts so much," she cried, and now her voice was purely human again, filled with pain and terror. "I can feel 2 different things fighting inside my body. The human part of me and this thing he made me into." Joseph approached carefully, still holding the medicine pouch. "Sarah, I need you to focus on my voice. Can you remember anything else about the doctor? Where he took you, what his laboratory looked like?" "Underground," Sarah gasped between waves of pain. Deep underground, carved into the rock, there were machines everywhere and tanks full of things. Pieces of animals, but also something else. Something that glowed green. Joseph's blood ran cold. His grandfather had told him stories about the green glow, though he had always assumed they were just legends. According to the old tales, certain spirits from the underworld could be captured and their essence extracted, creating a substance that glowed with an unnatural light. Did you see any symbols on the machines? Any markings? Sarah's body convulsed, and when she looked up at Joseph, half her face was human, and the other half was something else entirely. Symbols. Yes, they looked like your people's writing, but wrong somehow. Like someone had taken sacred symbols and twisted them. Joseph felt a surge of anger. Not only was someone conducting horrific experiments on innocent people, but they were also desecrating his people's sacred knowledge to do it. This was more than just murder. It was a spiritual violation that demanded justice. Sarah, how many others were there? You said you were number 7, but were there others still alive? 3, Sarah whispered, her human side fighting to maintain control. 3 others in tanks and sleeping but still breathing. He said they were his successful experiments, but that I was the first one who had kept enough human consciousness to be useful. Useful for what? Sarah's expression became haunted. He wanted me to hunt. He said my kind would be perfect hunters because we could think like humans but move like predators. He was planning to create an army of us. Joseph realized they were dealing with something far worse than a single madman. This was a systematic attempt to weaponize ancient knowledge, and Sarah might just be the beginning of something truly terrible. Suddenly, Sarah's body went rigid and her eyes rolled back in her head. When she looked at Joseph again, her humanity was completely gone. You talk too much, she hissed in a voice that was no longer her own. And I'm getting hungry. She sprang at Joseph with incredible speed, but this time he was ready. He threw the contents of his medicine pouch into the air, creating a cloud of sacred herbs and blessed objects. Sarah screamed as if she had been burned with acid and fell writhing to the ground. Joseph didn't wait to see how long the effect would last. He ran toward the canyon entrance, praying his horse hadn't gone too far. Behind him, he could hear Sarah's inhuman shrieks echoing off the canyon walls. He found his horse a quarter-mile away, grazing nervously near a cluster of juniper trees. The animal was still spooked but allowed Joseph to mount after several attempts. As they galloped away from Devil's Canyon, Joseph could see smoke rising from the direction they had come from. Whether it was from his scattered herbs or something else, he couldn't tell. By the time he reached the main road, the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Joseph rode hard toward the nearest town, his mind racing with everything he had learned. He needed to contact the tribal police and probably the FBI as well. But more importantly, he needed to find someone who understood the old ways well enough to help him make sense of what was happening. As he rode, Joseph couldn't shake the image of Sarah's transformation, or her words about the 3 other successful experiments waiting in underground tanks. Somewhere out there, a madman was creating an army of monsters using his people's sacred knowledge, and Sarah might just be the first soldier in a war that could destroy everything Joseph held dear. The lights of the town appeared ahead, but Joseph knew that reaching civilization was only the beginning. The real challenge would be convincing people that what he had witnessed was real, and then finding a way to stop it before more innocent people were transformed into creatures of nightmare. Behind him, carried on the desert wind, he thought he could still hear Sarah's voice calling his name. But whether it was her human side crying for help or her monster side promising revenge, he couldn't tell. Joseph burst through the doors of the tribal police station, just as Officer Maria Yazzie was preparing to leave for the night. She took one look at his wild appearance and the terror in his eyes, and immediately knew something serious had happened. "Joseph, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse than a ghost," Joseph gasped, still catching his breath from his frantic ride. "Maria, I need you to contact the FBI immediately. And we need to call my grandmother. This involves the old knowledge." Maria frowned. She had known Joseph since childhood, and he wasn't prone to panic or wild stories. If he was this frightened, something genuinely terrible had happened. "Slow down and tell me everything," she said, leading him to a chair and pouring him a cup of coffee. Joseph told her the entire story, from hearing Sarah's cries for help to his narrow escape from the transformed woman. As he spoke, Maria's expression grew increasingly grave. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Joseph, you realize how this sounds, she said finally. Shape-shifting monsters created by mad scientists? Even if I believed every word, who else would? The physical evidence is there, Joseph insisted. The pulley system, the torn sack, the tracks. And Sarah herself, she's still in that canyon somewhere. Maria picked up the phone. I'll call Agent Harrison at the FBI field office. He's worked with us before on cases involving the reservation. But Joseph, if we're going to convince anyone to take this seriously, we need more than just your testimony. While Maria made her calls, Joseph tried to reach his grandmother on her old landline. When her familiar voice answered, he felt some of his tension ease. Grandmother, I need your help. Something has happened that involves the old stories, the dangerous ones you warned me never to repeat. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Come to me immediately, his grandmother said finally. And Joseph? Bring sage and white sage, as much as you can find. Also bring silver if you have any. Grandmother, how did you know? Because I have been dreaming of this for 3 nights now, she replied. The spirits have been trying to warn me, but I couldn't understand the message until now. There is an ancient evil that someone has awakened using modern methods. We must act quickly before it spreads. Joseph's heart sank as he realized the situation was even worse than he had thought. If his grandmother had been having prophetic dreams, it meant the spiritual world had been disturbed by whatever the mysterious doctor was doing. Agent Harrison arrived within an hour, a tall man in his 40s with graying hair and tired eyes. He listened to Joseph's story with the patience of someone who had heard many strange tales during his time working with Native American communities. Mr. Begay, he said when Joseph finished, I won't lie to you. This sounds like something out of a horror movie, but I've learned to take reports from tribal members seriously, especially when they involve potential crimes against persons. So you'll investigate? I'll send a team to Devil's Canyon at first light, Harrison confirmed. If we find evidence of the scene you described, we'll expand the investigation. But I have to ask, is there any chance this woman Sarah could have been suffering from some kind of drug-induced psychosis? That might explain her altered appearance and behavior. Joseph shook his head. Agent Harrison, I know what I saw. This wasn't drugs or mental illness. This was something that science was never meant to create. Harrison made notes in his file. You mentioned she said there were 3 others still alive in tanks. If that's true, we're dealing with kidnapping at minimum, possibly multiple homicides. That's definitely within FBI jurisdiction. After Harrison left to organize his team, Joseph drove to his grandmother's house on the outskirts of town. Ellen Begay was 83 years old, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and she was still considered one of the most knowledgeable medicine women in the region. Sit down. Grandson, she said as soon as he walked through her door. Tell me everything you left out when you called. Joseph was surprised that she knew he had omitted details, but he should have expected it. His grandmother had always been able to read people with uncanny accuracy. The woman, Sarah, when she was fully transformed, she spoke about serving a master. She said the hunger wasn't just for food, it was for something else, something spiritual. His grandmother nodded grimly. She was created to be a soul eater. In the old days, we had stories about such creatures. They would consume not just the flesh, but the life force itself, growing stronger with each victim. Can they be stopped? The old ones could be, but they were natural creatures bound by spiritual laws. If someone has used science to recreate them, those laws might not apply anymore. Ellen stood and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner of her living room. However, there are certain protections that work on any creature that feeds on spiritual energy. She opened the chest and pulled out several items: a necklace made of turquoise and silver, a small pouch of white sand, and a bundle of herbs that Joseph didn't recognize. These have been in our family for 7 generations, she explained. My great-great-grandmother used them to protect our people from the last outbreak of soul eaters in 1847. There have been others? Oh yes, Ellen said sadly. Every few generations, someone tries to harness powers they don't understand. Usually they destroy themselves before they can cause too much damage. But this time feels different. This time, they succeeded in creating something stable. Joseph felt a chill as he realized what his grandmother was saying. How many people could die if we can't stop this? Ellen's expression was grave as she handed him the protective items. If the doctor Sarah described has truly learned to create soul eaters that retain human intelligence, there may be no limit to the damage they could cause. These creatures could blend into human society, hunt without being detected, and grow stronger with each kill. Outside, the desert wind began to howl, carrying with it a sound that made both Joseph and his grandmother freeze in terror. Somewhere in the darkness, something was calling his name, and it wasn't entirely human. "She followed you," Ellen whispered. "The creature is here." Joseph and his grandmother quickly began preparing defenses as Sarah's inhuman voice echoed across the desert landscape. Ellen moved with surprising speed for her age, sprinkling the white sand in a circle around her house while chanting in the old language. "The sand is blessed," she explained as she worked. "It will slow her down, but it won't stop her permanently. We need to find a way to break the connection between her human soul and the creature that's been bonded to it." Joseph put on the turquoise and silver necklace his grandmother had given him, immediately feeling a sense of protection and clarity wash over him. "Is that possible? Can we save her?" "Perhaps," Ellen said, completing the circle and hurrying back inside. "But first we must survive her attack. The creature side of her will be fully in control now, driven by the hunger you described." Through the window, they could see a figure approaching through the darkness. It moved with that same fluid grace Joseph remembered, but now Sarah's appearance had changed even more dramatically. Her limbs had elongated further, and she seemed to glide rather than walk across the desert floor. "Joseph," she called out in a voice that carried impossible distances. "I've followed your scent all the way here. You smell like fear and sacred things. Both are so delicious." Ellen handed Joseph the bundle of unfamiliar herbs. "These are ghost pipe and devil's claw root, blessed by every medicine woman in our family line. If you can get close enough to her to burn these, the smoke might drive out the creature spirit and leave only her human soul. And if it doesn't work?" Ellen's expression was grim. "Then we pray the FBI agent believed you enough to bring backup, because we'll need all the help we can get." Sarah had reached the circle of blessed sand, and she recoiled as if she had touched hot coals. She walked around the perimeter, testing it at different points, her forearms moving independently as she searched for a weakness. "Clever old woman," she hissed, her voice carrying clearly through the desert air. "But circles can be broken, and I have all night." Joseph watched in horror as Sarah began to dig with her claws, trying to break through the sand barrier. Each time she touched the blessed sand, smoke rose from her fingers, but she persisted despite the obvious pain. "She's stronger than I expected," Ellen murmured. "The doctor who created her must have used a very powerful spirit to bond with her human soul." "What kind of spirit?" "From her behavior and abilities, I would guess a Wendigo or something similar. A creature of endless hunger that grows stronger with each feeding." Joseph remembered Sarah mentioning that she was the first successful subject who had retained human intelligence. "Grandmother, what if her human consciousness isn't just a side effect? What if the doctor deliberately preserved it to make her a better hunter?" Ellen's eyes widened as she understood the implications. A creature with human intelligence but inhuman abilities, able to blend into society and hunt systematically rather than randomly. That would indeed be the perfect weapon. Outside, Sarah had succeeded in breaking through the sand circle at one point. She stepped through the gap, and immediately the house began to tremble as her presence affected the spiritual protections Ellen had woven into the building over decades of living. "There. She's inside the outer defenses. Now," Ellen said, "we need to act quickly." Joseph gripped the herbs tightly and headed for the door, but Ellen caught his arm. "Wait," she said. "I have an idea, but it's dangerous. What if we don't try to drive out the creature spirit? What if we try to strengthen her human soul instead? Is that possible?" "It's never been attempted before, but the principle is sound. If we can help her human consciousness regain control, she might be able to fight the creature from within." Ellen pulled out a small clay bowl and began mixing ingredients Joseph didn't recognize. "This is a mixture our ancestors used to call back souls that had become lost or separated from their bodies. If Sarah's human soul is still intact but overpowered, this might help her reclaim control." Sarah's voice came from directly outside the house now. "I can smell your magic, old woman. It won't protect you from what I've become." "Joseph," Ellen whispered urgently, "when she breaks through the door, throw this mixture at her feet and speak her human name 3 times. Don't use force or violence. Speak with compassion as if you're calling to a lost friend." The front door exploded inward as Sarah smashed through it with her inhuman strength. In the lamplight of the small house, her transformation was even more horrifying than Joseph remembered. Her face was barely recognizable as human, and her forearms moved with predatory grace as she advanced on them. But Joseph forced himself to look past the monster she had become and focus on the human soul that might still be trapped. "Inside, Sarah Mitchell," he said clearly, throwing the mixture at her feet as instructed. Smoke rose immediately, filling the room with the scent of sage and other sacred plants. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell. The creature froze mid-stride, and for a moment Joseph thought he saw confusion in her black eyes. "I remember that name," she whispered, her voice suddenly uncertain. "Sarah Mitchell. That's me, isn't it?" Ellen began chanting in the old language, her voice growing stronger with each word. The smoke from the mixture swirled around Sarah, and Joseph could see her fighting some kind of internal battle. "Joseph," Sarah said, and now her voice was purely human again. "I can feel myself coming back. The hunger is still there, but I can think around it now." "Sarah, we need to know where the doctor's laboratory is," Joseph said urgently. "There are others like you, and we need to stop him before he creates more." Sarah's face contorted with effort as she fought to maintain control. "North of here, about 20 miles into the desert, there's an old mining operation called the Silver Creek Mine. He's built his laboratory in the abandoned tunnels underground." Ellen's chanting grew more intense, and the smoke thickened around Sarah. "The connection is weakening," she gasped. "Whatever that doctor used to bond the creature spirit to me, your grandmother's ritual is breaking it apart." "What happens when it breaks completely?" Joseph asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it was a completely human expression. "I think I get to rest," she said peacefully. "I think I finally get to be free." The smoke suddenly flared bright white, filling the entire room with blinding light. When Joseph's vision cleared, Sarah was lying motionless on the floor. Her body returned to normal human proportions. Ellen knelt beside her and checked for a pulse. "She's alive," Ellen announced, "but very weak. Her human soul is intact, but the separation process has left her drained." Joseph heard vehicles approaching outside. Agent Harrison's team had finally arrived. As he went to meet them, he realized their night was far from over. They now knew where the doctor's laboratory was located, and there were still 3 other victims waiting to be rescued. The real battle was just beginning.